What's going on, everybody? James here from Artificial Entertainment, and today we're going to be continuing on with the Dynamic Parkour Trace System full setup series and going into the TicTac actions. So let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, so we have here the project that we've set up the modifications as well as set up the vaulting and mantling system. So I did go ahead and set up just a simple kind of wall area for us to be able to practice on the TicTac action. So I removed the other stuff. And I did also just kind of assign the animations to my skeleton. So that's all that I've done. So it's just kind of, just so that way you guys didn't have to watch me do the retarget process again. But just to kind of reiterate for anybody who, just might need a little bit of a refresher, all you need to do is make sure you have animations that are assigned to the skeleton that you're using and that they have root motion. So long as that is the case, you'll be able to follow along with no problem. The TicTac actions, I will say, are something that not every parkour pack has. I wouldn't say it's one that only a few have, but it's definitely one that not everyone has. Now, so the reason why this action is in here is because it's available in enough that I wanted to make it an action that was available. But, it's one of those things that if you don't have the animation, I understand it can be difficult. But so long as you do have the animation, setting it up, pretty much this entire element of it is very, very, very simple. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about what is the TicTac action. Well, it's essentially a wall-assisted jump. As you can see here, he's kind of jumping out the side wall and then just kind of going into a falling state. So that's the kind of the free jump. This one is where he's kind of going off the wall and then jumping onto something above him. And then this one is kind of vaulting over something that's in his way. But no matter what, he's looking for a sidewall type of object. Now, there's a trace in the system that looks exactly for that type of area. And you can modify this in a little bit of a few different ways. So the first thing that we're going to look at is that trace specifically. So under the dynamic parkour trace system in the actual character blueprint here, we're going to go under the primary system settings, and then under the the initial area options here, we're going to go to the trace options, and then under the trace debug type, the draw debug type, set this to for duration, compile, and save. Now, we're just going to go ahead and hit play. Now, if I jump, you're going to see that there's two traces, one to the left and one to the right. These are the traces looking for a sidewall. However, you can modify how these work by, let's say, for example, the distance. If you want to set this so that way it goes to something maybe a little closer to the character, so this way it doesn't go as far outwards. If we compile and play, we can go ahead and you can see now that the traces are running significantly shorter. And, vice versa, if you wanted to set the, something that was looking for walls significantly farther away, you can do the same thing. And, as far as like the closest to the character, you can set this as well. So if I set this, the distance to 250 here, and if I hit play this time, you can see that now the trace is running pretty much right at the end there. So there's a lot of different ways to be able to modify this, but I use the 120 as the default value because it's just a nice kind of starting number. You can modify this and play with this however you want. But we're going to go ahead and turn off the draw debug type now. And I want to talk a little bit about the locations and the way that all this works. So we're going to go into the override, motion warp, and action output settings here, set that's true. And then we're going to go up to the ground action settings, TicTac actions, and then for allowed TicTac actions, we're just going to set the free jump to true for right now, and then compile and save. So what we're going to do is if we hit play right now, and we just hit the space bar, you'll see that it says TicTac left free jump, platform height, -22, because it's lower than the character. Or lower than the initial starting point, I should say. But as you can see here, we're getting a nice sphere that's located off to the sidewall location. And that is the warp 4 location, which is kind of like the starting point for a sidewall. Now, for the free jump, you only get this one location because it's basically saying, okay, we have no objects in front of us. We're able to kind of do a full-on free jump type action. Let's do it. But if we were to, let's say, for example, go back into the character blueprint here and enable the, let's say we'll go to the over action type here, compile and save, and then hit play. If I were to go ahead and press space, you can see that we now get a warp 1, 2, 3, and 4 as all locations that we can utilize to be able to, do what we need to do. Now let's talk about setting up these actions. So we're going to go, I have all the TicTac actions here in a folder. And, again, you just need to make sure that they have root motion. As long as they have root motion, you'll be good to go. And we're just going to create a new folder and call this montages. And then we're going to click on this one and then shift click on the last one here. And then right click, create and a montage. And then we're going to do the same thing with click and then the shift click to select all of these and move them into the montages folder. So now we have all of our TicTac actions inside of this nice little folder. Now we're going to open up the left jump montage here. And we're going to take a look at kind of the overall action here. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to add a new track, right click, notify state, motion warping. Now, we're going to want to look at where he kind of gets to the wall. Something right about there, I think, is going to be good. And we'll put that point right about there. Now, when it comes to the free jump type actions, you want to look at where he kind of is going to enter the jump. So something right about there is going to be where you want to go. Right click, add notify, and reset parkour action, because we're entering into a free fall type of state. Now, we do need to make sure to set the warp information. So we're going to click on the motion warp point here, on the warp target name, and we're going to set this to warp 4 because that's that sidewall location. We're going to make sure ignore z-axis is unchecked, and we're going to uncheck warp rotation as well, and then click save. Now we're going to go to the TicTac right. It's the right on, it's the wrong one. And we're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to go track, at notify track, right click, notify state, and then motion warping. And we're going to look at, where he starts going onto the wall. So that'd be right about there. And we're going to move that to there. Look at where he kind of enters his jump, which is going to be right about here. And we're just going to right click, add notify, and reset parkour action. Perfect. So now that we have all those set up, we can just go ahead and define the motion warp window here. And we're just going to click on this and name it to warp 4. Uncheck the ignore z-axis and the warp rotation. So now we have our free jump action set up. So all we need to do is just go back into our character blueprint here, third person blueprints, BP third person character, go into the dynamic parkour trace system, and we're going to uncheck the over option for right now, just leaving the free jump option. And we're going to uncheck the override motion warp and action output settings. This way we can actually have montages being triggered versus just being blocked and, giving us data. Now, we're just going to really quickly as well add in the actual event for the TicTac actions and the montages. So in the interface section here, we're going to go to the action events, and then we're going to add in the TicTac actions by double clicking and drag it over to where the rest of our events are here, and do the usual where we can box select the montage, and the mesh, Control D to duplicate it, and then we can just hook up the execution, pull off the montage to play, get a select node just like that, and get the enum here, the TicTac type action, and plug that into the index. And then if we compile, save, and then we're just going to kind of make this window a little bit smaller. And the reason I like to do this is because the content drawer here, unless we dock it to the layout, it's going to go away the second I click on this. So I like to do this because it allows me access to both windows, and this way I can get all of my animations right here in the bottom of my browser, and I can just kind of click on them and put them in. So if we go into the TicTac folder here, montages, and we'll see the TicTac left jump. So we see the TicTac free jump left, put that into there. TicTac right jump, put that one into there. TicTac jump on, this is for the right side. So we're going to go the right onto, and then the right speed. So this is the right over. And then the left speed, this is for left over. And then left onto for left onto. Perfect. So now we have all of our montages loaded in, but we only have the free jump being allowed right now. So this will allow us to be able to ensure that we don't trigger anything that we're not actually trying to do. So if we go ahead and you can see now we're doing a TicTac jump. Now, there's probably some refinement we can do here on the jump type montage here. So if I open this up, maybe push this back to frame 17 instead. And then we'll do the same thing with the jump montage here, where we'll push it back to frame 17, just to kind of make it so that way his jump gets a little bit cut back. So yeah, something like that looked a lot better. So this way we can get a nice consistent action on both sides. But you can always play around with this. If we move it back to, let's say, frame 14. Now, one thing that's cool about the TicTac actions is because there's left and right variants. So if we keep the left side to what we had, and we just modify the right side, we can see, okay, that's what it does to the right side, while the left side looks like this. Okay, well, that looks pretty good, but I think that's a little too far. And this is where you can kind of play around with it and modify it to, whatever's going to meet the needs that you're trying to get for your game. So now from here, what we can do is we can set up the over actions, the TicTac over. Now, one thing I want to point out here is we'll go ahead and stop play real quick, and we're going to go to the character, go to the parkour system here, pull out the settings, and we're going to turn onto as an option, but we're going to override the motion warp settings really quickly, because this way I can show you guys the warp points and the way that they work. So if I go ahead and if I go up to this object, you can see that we have warp 1, which is a low point, warp 2, which is up a little bit higher, and the green warp landing, which is because it's showing a wall vault over. My apologies. There we go. All right, so we got the free jump. Oh, we selected onto, not over. Oh, okay. That makes a lot more sense. I was starting to think I had a bug in my system. I was getting very concerned. Okay, so now, okay, there we go. So we got the TicTac left over. So you can see how warp 1 is pulled back a little bit. Warp 2 is kind of the opposite ledge side there. Then we got warp 4 at the bottom there, and warp 3 as that kind of landing point on the other side. So this is a way to be able to tell kind of like what locations you want to use. So we go ahead and we look at the TicTac. We'll go with the left speed here. So we'll start with the left side. And we're going to look at, just kind of do the same thing. We're going to track, add notify track, right click, do a notify, motion warping. And we're going to look at right, just like we did with the free jump, we're going to look at where he kind of starts posting up onto the wall itself. Something like right about there. And then we can right click, notify state, motion warping. And now what I suggest is looking at for when he kind of jumps off the wall. So something like right about here where he starts to really kind of push off of the wall. From here to maybe right about here, we'll set this. And this I recommend using as warp 1. And we're going to ignore z-axis and rotation. And the reason why is because it allows for a nice height adjustment before he gets to the pivot point that's going to be for the actual like vault over of the object in front of him. So we're going to add the motion warping window here again, and we're going to look for kind of like the best pivot spot here where his root bone would line up probably best, which would be, I would say right about there. And we'll put that there, and we'll line this up like this. And this one's going to be warp 2, because as we saw, the warp 2 point is kind of like that opposite ledge. So this is where he's going to be kind of reaching to the edge of the point before he starts doing his fall off, which is going to be right about here. And I would say right about there is a good stopping point. So we're just going to go right click, add notify state, motion warping, and we'll go ahead and pull it back, go back to that point there. And we're going to pull this to right about there, and this is going to be warp 3 because that's going to be that ending or land point there. Ignore z-axis and warp rotation. Now we're just going to go back to the first point here because we didn't do the settings on this one, so this one's going to be warp 4. Ignore z-axis, warp rotation, and then we're just going to add the notify at the end here. So we're going to right click, add notify, and then reset parkour action. Boom. So now we have the TicTac left speed vault. So if I go ahead and I click on play here, and I go up to this object, oh, we still have the actions disabled. So we go back to the character here, and we're going to turn off the override, and then compile and save, minimize, and then click on play. And you can see that now he does the vault over type action. Now there's, some refinement I could probably do to, the warp locations and the way that he moves to certain places and, blend spaces and stuff like that. But this is where, you kind of refine it to what you need. So if I were to, just as an example, if I were to modify anything, it would probably be, let's see. So he takes maybe a little too long to get to this point. So if I do this, and then maybe keep that where it is, but I stop where it blends into there, and then set the blend out time from 0.25 to 0.1, just to show you example of some modifications that you could make. You can see that it's a little bit better. Might want to move warp 1 down a little bit or adjust the the location of things a little bit, but ultimately this is where just playing around and fine-tuning into what you need. And I don't want to sit here and modify warp windows for 10 minutes or so, because ultimately you can just play around with it and find whatever works best for your animation. And the thing to remember is that anything that we do on the left side, it's the same thing for the right side. So for the right speed montage here, what we're going to do is just kind of the same setup here. So we're going to go track, add notify track, right click, add notify state, and then motion warping. We're going to go and take a look at the position where he reaches the wall, which is going to be right about there. And then we'll name this to warp 4, and then uncheck the rotation and ignore z-axis, and then add another notify state, motion warping, kind of look at where he jumps off the wall, or it starts to anyways, and then get right about there. Pull this forward, then add another notify state, motion warping, and then we'll kind of put it right about, something right about here. This way he can pivot off, and then right about here is where we'll do the fall off. So we'll add notify state again, motion warping, and right about there seems like a good fall off point. And then we'll just start adding in the data here. So, warp 3 for the landing position. Again, ignore z-axes and warp rotation. And going up here, again, this is going to be warp 2. Ignore z-axes. You don't need to uncheck warp rotation. This is just something that I've been doing with my recent setups because I've found that there's just some better consistency when you exit things a little bit. But it's entirely up to whatever works best. You can use warp rotation. As for these actions, there is a rotation that is applied. It's just the actor rotation. But I personally have found some better results when we're unchecking the warp rotation. And we're just going to name this one to warp 1. And then we got now warp 4. Warp 1, warp 2, and then warp 3. So now we can go ahead and save, and if we do it from the other side now, so what I'll do is, since my cube actually seemed to have disappeared on me, I'll just go ahead and add another one here to the other side. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and hit on play, and now you see we got the TicTac action to the other side, but we forgot to put the notify in. So we'll do that really quickly. We'll right-click, add notify, and reset parkour action. So if you ever start floating like that at the end of an action, it's just usually a good idea to double check that you've added the notify, because you can see now the behavior's a little more proper. Again, the lineup could be better, but that's, motion warp windows and using the offset menu to be able to change, certain locations. Now for the last action here is going to be the TicTac onto. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of make this a little bit bigger. And we'll kind of center it more in the middle, just in case this one decides to disappear on us as well. So now we're going to go up and open the TicTac jump on, just like this. And we're going to do almost the same setup like what we've been doing with all the other actions, but there's one little change that we're going to make. So we'll go ahead, add a new notify track. We're going to right click, add notify state, add motion warping, and we'll just go ahead and scrub through where it gets to the wall, right about there. And then we'll name this to warp 4, and then we'll uncheck the warp rotation and the z-axes, and we'll add another notify state motion warping, pull forward just a bit, something right about there. And we're going to look at where he just before he lands, kind of the height point before he gets all the way up, which is going to be right about here. We might be able to pull it forward just a smidgen, and this one is going to be warp 1. And we're going to go ignore z-axes and warp rotation, then right click again, notify state, motion warping, and then we're just going to drag this back and look at where he gets to a full land, something right about here. Now the reason why I recommend doing it here and not here is because the root bone is still traveling at this point. The feet are at this point, but the root bone is still right about here. So we want to have it so that way it travels all the way forward before it actually ends. So this one's going to be warp 3 because this is the landing position. We're going to keep z-axes and warp rotation continue to be unchecked. And then we're going to put our notify right here at the end. So add notify, reset parkour action. But this is where our change is going to be. So because of the fact that we're not actually entering a falling state with this action, we're landing on top of something. So we want to make sure to set the movement mode from falling to walking. So now we're going to click on save, and we'll go to the left side, and we'll do the same thing. So we'll do the left side onto action here. And then once again, track, add notify track, right click, notify state, motion warping, and look at where he puts his foot on the wall, and look at where he starts his jump. Right click, add another motion warping window, and look at right about where he's going to complete his jump, but not quite as he lands, and then where he fully lands and lines up with the middle. So that's going to be right about there. Add notify state, motion warping, and line this up from here to here, and then right click, add notify, and reset parkour action. So now all we got to do is when the first one here, root motion modifier, name this to warp 4, because again, we're always starting with that sidewall point on a TicTac action. This one's going to be warp 1, and this one's going to be warp 3. Make sure we got the warp rotation and ignore z-axis unchecked on all of these two, and we should be good to go. All right, so we're going to save that. Now, before we actually go ahead and use the action here, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the parkour system here. We're going to override the action output, and we're going to enable the onto option. The reason why we're doing this is because I want to show you guys the warp points like I've done with every other action before we actually go ahead and put it in. So if I go ahead and hit the space bars here, you'll see that the warp 1 point is a little bit higher. So you're starting off at the sidewall here, and then you're jumping up to that yellow point and then landing on the green point. So this is the reason why we set the line up the way we did. But again, you can use the offsets and adjust them to whatever fit your animation. But if I go ahead and we'll go back to the third-person character here, turn off the override, compile and save, and now we'll hit play. And if I go over to the onto action here, you can see that we now land on top of the action. We use that little sidewall assist, and bam. I hope that time it performed the free jump. So this is one thing that I will say to bear in mind, is that when your trace distance is too short, it might accidentally choose the free jump rather than the onto or over versions of TicTac. This is something I am actively working on to try and fine tune a little bit, but ultimately it doesn't create too much of a problem if you put your trace distance a little bit more forward than what you would normally put. But as you can see here, he's jumping onto the wall, and I can go to the other side here just to show you the other side here. Oh, it did the free jump instead. You can see that he jumps on top of the object, no problem. Then I can go to the other side, do the same thing. I could even do the free jump here, like this. I can go over to the vault object here and do that. So now we have the TicTac actions in place. And again, the positions of them, it's just all about refining these windows. And, I've shown you guys a few examples of different things that can happen, how much the animation look overall can change just by doing those animation window refinements a little bit. But that's really it, guys. That's all the TicTac actions. It's just kind of setting it up so that way your character aligns on the wall with warp 4. Assessing, which warp points you want to use for which type of location, and then just putting those in. Just like with every other action, you're just kind of assessing which locations in world space match the way the animation moves, and then just kind of assigning that inside of the warp points, inside of the actual montages themselves. But that's going to close out for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. And in the next video, we're going to be going over the miscellaneous actions, which is going to be like the dive through window and attach to ledge and a few other different things that are all in the miscellaneous actions type category. So I hope you guys are excited. I know I am. And I hope to see you guys in the next one. But until then, stay tuned. And as always, stay animated.